There we go. So I'm Tim Sidock with Tech Nation. This is the Startup Skills Series, which is part of our Career Ready program, which is a wage subsidy program for small and medium enterprises in Canada to hire students in tech immersive roles. We're in our third week, like I said, so we can leave this pretty quick, but we have many more of these startup skills happening, and I'll be releasing an event update tomorrow. So if you're not on our email list, send me an email and I will make sure you are on it, and you'll get all the news of all of our great events coming up. There's a lot of them happening in March, so stay tuned. And yeah, now I'll hand it off to Scott. And thanks everybody for being here. Thanks, Scott.
What was that?
So thank you everybody for being here, and thank you, Scott. So yeah, without further ado, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you, Tim. And I don't think I'm on that email list just yet, so I'll have to find a way to subscribe or send you over my email to get that started with. So yeah, so everyone, if you haven't signed up yet, definitely check out the email list. Tech Nation has a lot of different events coming up, and really happy to have you here as part of our event for today. And so the primary focus for today, just as I'm setting up here and letting people in the room, is we're really going to be talking about attention management. And so I always like to bring a statistic or a story really based on, what was the premise of this presentation. And the idea behind this was I was reading about something that mentioned about 3 in 5 workers agreed to take on more tasks than they can actually get done on their to-do list. Now, this is a study done by Vital Smarts. Now, how does that resonate with you? Are you one of those 3 in 5? I almost feel like 3 in 5 sounds low, but do you often take on more than you can actually handle? And do you find it challenging to stay focused on one task at a time when you have all these other things you're looking to accomplish or to do? And, is this causing a certain level of overwhelm? Trying to tackle or manage this never-ending to-do list. It might be draining your time, your energy, and as well as your focus. And so the purpose of this presentation today is we're really going to be talking about and helping you learn some different attention management habits to be able to help you create greater focus. We'll look at ways at how you might be able to manage your attention space, create focused work periods, and finish the day with an ability to disconnect and feeling less stressed and overwhelmed. So if you're with us for the third time here, we've probably already been acquainted. For those of you that we haven't met before, my name is Scott Rust. I'm the COO, as well as co-founder of Intuitive Performance and a ACC accredited international, or accredited with the International Coaching Federation. And for myself, how it all started really was 4 or 5 years ago when I discovered the power of habits and the role they played in our life, where studies show that about 40 to 45% of your daily decisions are based on habits. And when I discovered that, I figured, well, if I can optimize just that 40 or 45% of my decision-making, then I don't have to worry about the other 60 or so percent. And so for me, what happened and the real change that made me realize the impact of habits and behavior change was when I tried making waking up early a habit. It took me like 4 months to make waking up early something I did on a regular basis. But the importance there it showed me is the power of behavior change. That you actually can change the way you do things with enough effort and a strategy. And so from there, I really took a deep dive onto how do we develop habits and what is the impact on our energy levels and how can we manage our attention. And so I'm curious, who else here has thought, if I could just sit down and focus, I'd be able to get a lot more done. And maybe input here in the chat if this is something that resonates with you. But if you just think, if I had more focus, I could make a dent to my to-do list. I'd feel more in control of my responsibilities. And so I bring this up just so we're all on the same page as to what we're looking to get out of this workshop here is really finding ways in how you might be able to manage your attention to be able to optimize your focus. So I'm just going to share my screen here and we'll get started with the PowerPoint. Jason says, yes, I want to stay focused until the phone rings. And so I believe you might have joined us last week where we talked about energy management, Jason. We talked about being proactive and eliminating those distractions before they come up. And for those of you who might not have been able to join us last week, I believe Tim sent out a recording of each of these videos. So you would have access to being able to go back, and I encourage you to go back and re-listen to some of those things. So as we move into the workshop overview for today, again, I'd really like this to be an interactive workshop as much as possible. I'd encourage you to use the chat box for your input. And if you have any specific questions, please feel free to write them down and we'll answer those at the end. And let's really make the next 90 minutes or so as inclusive as possible. And so I've actually incorporated a short video. We also have a bit of an exercise we're going to go through, but I'm jumping ahead of myself here. So in terms of what we're going to be discussing and looking at is we'll take a look at attention space and how we all have a limited attention space. And what does it look like when we're overwhelmed? And how can we actually create greater focus? Next, we'll be discussing the impact of your environment and how you might be able to design your environment for success and how your environment around you actually influences how focused you can be. Next, we'll also be talking about creating business focus periods. So we've looked at in week 1 around time management, we were looking at the Eisenhower matrix and how, those non-urgent, but really important items that come up, how can we actually take action on them? And so we'll take a look at those a little bit further with these business focus periods. And lastly, we'll be creating a commitment plan. The idea here isn't to try and change everything all at once, but rather find one specific thing that you like to work on. And we'll take some time towards the end to create a commitment plan together. And then what I'll do is I'll have 2 or 3 people actually share their commitment plan. And we'll go through it together to be able to help you benefit as much as possible and to be able to leave this workshop with some tangible and actionable things that you can do and start practicing out in the workplace. So we've touched on this in the past, but I think it's an important reminder as to what does it really mean to be productive? And we talk quite a bit around time management, but time is only really one piece of the productivity equation. There's also energy management. We talked about fluctuations in energy and attention management, so how much you can actually focus at a given period of time. And so what happens is if we take out just one of these things, it makes it very challenging to be productive. And so you can have a lot of energy and you can feel like you can stay focused, but if you don't have the time to apply yourself, it's difficult to be productive. Next is if we take energy away and you have time on your side and you can focus, but you can only do so for really short periods of time because you're lacking the energy to really work through a longer project, again, makes it very challenging to be productive. And then the last piece here, which I think is really relevant for today, is have you ever found yourself with a lot of time and energy, and yet you don't have the focus to work on one thing, and you find yourself jumping from one to the next, to the next, to the next, really only accomplishing a small percentage of each of these items or projects, rather than managing to bring one thing to the finish line. And so moving into our last week here as part of our 3-part series, I encourage you to think about the things that we're discussing here today as business habits. And when we talk about business habits, it's really the way that you work. It is the structure or the box in which you do things. And so 2 weeks ago, we talked about time management. We also discussed energy management last week. And now today, finalizing or completing our self-management skills series, we'll be discussing attention management. So let's jump into the first section here around attention space. And we're actually going to kick things off with a short video and an exercise that we're going to do all together. But first, before we jump into that, what are the costs of multitasking? And I really find it interesting thinking about multitasking. In the past, it used to be something that we put on our resumes or our CVs and say, I'm a really great multitasker. But more and more studies are showing up that our brains and our attention aren't actually built to be able to multitask or be able to do multiple things at once. And what happens when you're jumping from one thing to the other is it can actually cost up to 40% of your productivity. That's huge. You're taking away 40% of the way that you're able to work on the specific tasks. So the idea here, the goal is to be able to shift from multitasking and having all these different things or different tabs open all at once and to focus on just working on one thing at a time. So some of the costs of multitasking include task switching. So when you jump from one task to another task, what happens is it creates something called attention residue. And I'll touch on this a little bit later. But the idea behind attention residue is that if we use an example of like a computer, and so think about it as opening up a new tab. So when you're jumping from one task and switching on to another task, if there's no break in between, what happens is it's like opening a brand new tab in your mind. And when you continually do this over and over and over again, you're not able to actually clear the cache. But think about your browser as a limited browser, so you can only have X amount of tabs open at once. So for every new task you jump into, without creating space in between to kind of reset and start over, will actually impact your productivity or your ability to focus. And so I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment. We're going to listen to a 3.5-minute video from a good friend of mine, Delphi, here in Ottawa, who participated in part of our TEDx Ottawa last year. And so I'm just going to make sure to share the sound. Actually. And so for those of you, just make sure your sound is working correctly here. And just type in the chat maybe quickly here. I'll get it started if you can
especially your brains, to survive. That modern day equivalent is what I call brain scurvy.
All good?
That's right, you heard it. Brain scurvy.
Okay, that's where I want to start off from. All right, thank you, Michael.
What's our yellow lemon? What's the brain hack to get our life back? We are connected to screens almost 11 hours a day. That is more than what we sleep. With one single device, you can talk on the phone, send a text message, read an email, swipe left for a date, crush candy, check the weather and pay your bills, and switch between any of these tasks in an instant. Technology makes this easy. Technology makes this accessible. The problem is our brain has not evolved to do this well. Our brain was not wired to rapidly switch from task to task. Yet we do it, and we think we're good at it. You know what our brain was actually wired to do? Okay, I'm gonna tell you. I need to do, think of a task. Oh, I need to get my teeth clean. Do the task, call the dental office. Finish the task, I got my appointment set for next week. Finish, move on, simple. What's happening today? Pick up your phone. Oh, what's these notifications? Oh, click on this link. Oh, have you seen the videos of the cats riding the goat with the top hat? 2 hours later, still have not called the dental office. Focus, I can do this. Pick up the phone. Oh, I should check my work emails. Down the rabbit hole we go. 3 days later, still have not called the dental office. We've all been there. That is the pitfall of multitasking. Every time you switch from task to task, there's a cost. That cost is time, that cost is energy. Studies show that cost kills 40% of your productivity. It's stressful, it's exhausting. It's depleting your brain of the fuel it needs to be efficient, happy, productive. That deficiency is what I call brain scurvy. Could you have it? Let's play a fun game. See how much your brain actually loves to multitask. On the screen, there's two shapes, a square and a circle. I will show you a series of slides. If you see a circle, I want you guys to lift up your left hand. If you see a square, your right. Let's do it together. Circle, left. Oh, you guys are good. Square, right. One more time. Circle, left. Square, right. Okay, it's going to go pretty fast, so brace yourself. Let's play. Okay, you guys are pretty good. You guys nailed it. So now I don't want you to concentrate on the shape, so I'm gonna raise the stakes. I want you to concentrate on the color. So you see yellow, lift up the left hand. Blue, right. Together, yellow left, blue, right. Same rule, same game. Let's play. Okay. A little bit more hesitation, but you guys are still doing great. Here's the bad news. That was just the warm-up. Now we're actually going to multitask. There's the word that's going to pop up on the screen. It's either going to say shape or color. If it says shape, the next slide, you concentrate on the shape. So if it's a circle, left hand, square, right. If it says color, the next slide, you concentrate on the color. If it's yellow left, blue right. You guys are going to be okay. Take a deep breath. Think about it. It's the same two games, just put together. Let's play.
All right, then. So I do apologize. I think there's one or two people that mentioned that they were having trouble seeing the video itself. That being said, the main point was really for what she was discussing, and this. And so for those of you that are actually able to see the game, luckily for you, and this will help anybody that maybe was not able to see the video, I do apologize for that. We're actually going to play the game here, and we're going to get everybody to see how well they can actually multitask based on what we saw in the video itself. And so I'm just going to pull it up here. So Delphi was kind enough to actually share with me this presentation here. And Angela, just let me know as I share this here, just to make sure that you can see this. I know that you experienced some issues. So are we all on the same page here again? Can everyone see this PowerPoint screen here? Just maybe a quick yes in the chat would be great. Okay, great. And so the purpose of Delphi's video, so holding on here for a moment. So Angela, you seem to still be having an issue seeing it. Everyone else seems to be able to see. What I might recommend is just trying to click on the Zoom link again or down below. Or otherwise, as Tim had mentioned, maybe taking a step out of the room and coming back again. There are view options. Thank you everyone for pitching in here. There are view options on the top right-hand side as well. All right, great. So we're all on the same page. He's got it now. Perfect. All right, well, I don't want to leave anybody out of this game. And what I would actually do is to make this a little more interactive and fun, because it's not really fun playing a game all by yourself. If you feel comfortable, maybe come off or turn on your video just for the next couple of minutes. And we'll play this game together, and we'll actually be able to see how well everybody interacts. So if you feel comfortable, we're a small room here today. I'd encourage you maybe to just turn on your video and let's see how everybody does in terms of kind of playing this game at how well we can actually multitask. So I see we got a couple of brave people here coming off video. Thank you very much. So the idea here is what we're looking at is it says a shape. So if the circle comes up, what we want to do is we want to lift up our left hand. And if the square comes up, it's our right hand. So let's try this out together. So a circle would be the left, square would be our right. So pretty simple. So let's get started here. And for those of you at home that might not have your videos on, I encourage you to play along with us and just to understand the impact of multitasking. So again, left circle, square right. Let's get started. Okay, so not bad, not bad. That first one was pretty straightforward just in terms of the shapes. Now we're going to do the exact same thing, except now only focusing on the color. So only focusing on the color. So if it's blue, it's left, the blue left. And then if it's gold, it's right. So blue left, gold right. Let's try this out together. I even messed up there. And that's why it's fun to at least have other people on here as well. So not so bad. So that's really thinking about two-dimension, right? Two different things. Talking about just the color or just the shape and only think about that. But now when we bring in a little bit more complexity to the matter, when we talk about not just thinking about shape or color, thinking about shape and color. And so the goal here is what you'll see is a word will pop up and it will tell you either shape or it will tell you color. And based on what comes up, you have to go blue or circle is left, and then gold or square is right. Now it gets a little bit more complicated. Here we're only talking about adding in 2 or 3 more layers. So let's test it out and see how well we do. All right then. So as we see, just by adding in just a little bit more complexity to it, it gets to be a little bit more challenging in trying to figure out how do you jump from one thing to the other. And so the reason why I bring up this exercise is because it's just a great example of the impact of multitasking and jumping from one task to another. And so I'd encourage you to think about, as you're working on things, are you jumping from the color to the shape from one thing to the other, or are you really just focused on one thing at a time? So I appreciate everyone who came off video to play the game along with us, and for everyone else at home as well. Yeah, if you'd like to maybe just turn off your videos at the moment, we'll resume our presentation. So we're looking at working under pressure. It said about half of workers lose about 1 to 5 hours of work each week just due to stress. So do you ever find your attention being pulled in multiple directions? With so many demands on your plate, it's easy to get lost or get caught up in the daily grind. So the idea here is taking a step back, and this has been a bit of a theme throughout the 3-part series, but taking a step back and being really intentional with how we spend our time, our energy, or what we fill our attention space with. And the reason I bring this up is because what we fill our attention space with, what we pay attention to, actually has an impact on our quality of life, especially now more than ever with everything going on in the world. So the goal here is to practice mindful management and really filling our attention with what deserves to be there. Filling it with things that actually bring us joy or bring us happiness. And so the way that our brain is constructed, and back to what Delphi was mentioning, is it's not made to take in so many things at once or to do multiple things at one time. And so the idea here is good managing your attention is actually filling it very carefully with one thing and giving that your undivided attention. And that brings us to this thing called the one thing principle, where it's creating an environment to focus on a single task, free from distraction as much as possible for a period of time. So I'd like us to actually go through something where we're going to look at how your attention space is limited, how you can only focus or handle so many things at once, whether it be a few habitual tasks. What does your attention space look like when it's overwhelmed? And what is the goal of focus, and what does that really look like? So I'd like you to take a moment and imagine this circle here as your attention space. And every dot or white circle that comes up is another piece of information or is another action you might be taking. Now, the way that our attention has been created is we can actually handle a few things at once, a few habitual tasks. Now, an example of this might be listening to music while driving. Maybe you're walking and chewing gum while talking to a friend. We're able to do a few of these habitual things at once without really feeling overwhelmed or without any levels of stress. But what happens when we start to have more things come onto our plate? There's a new project that we're supposed to be working on. Maybe a deadline just got pushed or got pulled up earlier you have to work on. Maybe your car broke down or the bus came late. You know, all these different things that start to fill our attention space now start to create overwhelm. Now I want to check in with you. When you think about the last time you might have been overwhelmed or felt like you had too much, look at this picture here. How does this resonate? And maybe let me know in the chat, does this make sense? Is this something that, you know, when you think about being overwhelmed, how does this resonate with you? Maybe give me a yes or a thumbs up, so to speak. So the idea here is, you know, there's so many things that we're trying to get done at one time, but yet we're equipped with a limited attention space to actually do them. And so it sounds like a lot of people this resonates with, whether it be personally, whether it be professionally, you know, with so many tasks, so many things going on at one time, it's easy to feel overwhelmed like this. So I'm keeping this picture up here for a moment, just so you can really think about it, that next time you're feeling overwhelmed, that this is kind of what's happening. And then you start thinking about, well, how might I be able to take away just one of these circles? How might I be able to take away just two of them, right? Looking at ways to help limit that, which is what's filling your attention. And we'll look at some strategies of how you might be able to do that. Now, the real goal of what we're looking to accomplish or create is focus. And we're talking about focus, or you might have heard of it as flow. It's filling your attention space with one complex task that does fill your attention space. So you're able to just completely focus on that one thing. Now, working from home or even working in the office, you know, there's always different types of distractions. And we touched on it last week. We discussed energy management habits, about how you might be able to be proactive in eliminating some of those distractions to be able to create space so you can actually focus. Now, let's take a look at some ways and how you might be able to develop greater focus. In reality, we're looking at ways that how you might be able to raise your self-awareness. Maybe you're asking yourself, am I on autopilot? Am I just going through the motions without intention? Am I distracted? Am I struggling to focus on one thing? Or am I feeling overwhelmed? And is there just too much crowding my attention space? And am I jumping from one task to the other? Now, the purpose is, once we've actually raised our self-awareness, identified whether you're on autopilot, you're distracted, or you're feeling overwhelmed, so what can we do about it? What's one step that we can take in the right direction? And so if you're on autopilot, going through the motions, maybe it's taking a step back, taking a moment to set intention with how you want to spend your time, and maybe think really clearly as to what is the end goal I'm looking to get here? What is the end objective I'm looking to complete? Now, if you find yourself distracted, I'd encourage you to go back to our presentation last week. How might you be able to maybe proactively eliminate distractions? Or we also touched on this idea of externalizing your distractions. So if your distractions are within your attention space, and you have all these different things going on in your mind, and you're just trying to focus on what's in front of you, studies have shown by actually writing things down, to actually write down those tasks or write down those things will help in you externalizing those distractions from your attention space and providing a little bit more room to be able to focus on what's in front of you. Now, when you're feeling overwhelmed, there's too much that's going on at once. It's maybe identifying what is one small step you can take in the right direction. And rather than looking at the big picture and focusing on achieving the end goal, and I guess lack of a better analogy, I always come back to the idea of, climbing a mountain or hiking up a hill. The idea isn't to focus on the top of the hill, but rather focus on just what's in front of you. What's the next step that you can take? And by focusing on just the next step and actually actioning it and taking and moving that progress forward, it helps reduce some of that overwhelm that might be coming up. Now, I just want to pause here and see if there are any questions around the limited attention space that we have or raising your self-awareness. And I'll pause here for a moment in case anybody wants to add in the chat. Otherwise, feel free to maybe write the question down and we'll save some time towards the end to be able to address it as well. Okay. So just in wrapping up this section, we've talked a little bit about the importance of checking in, raising your self-awareness. We've looked at how your attention space is actually limited and what is the impact of feeling overwhelmed and what is the goal that we're looking to strive for towards feeling more focused. We discussed ways in how you might be able to develop your focus and also looked at, what are the costs of multitasking and trying to do multiple things at once, and what is the impact not only on our attention, but also on our energy levels over a longer period of time. So this brings us to the next section around designing your environment. So when we're looking at it from a habit development perspective, your environment actually plays a large role in the way that you conduct yourself, how you do things, whether it be personally or even in the workplace. So how does your environment really influence your decisions? So have you ever noticed how, the things around you can actually influence your actions one way or another? Maybe you might act differently with a certain crowd of friends than you would with others. Maybe where you go will actually determine what you wear. How you're feeling will actually influence your decision making, where depending on how you're feeling, you might have made a different decision if you were in a more positive state, or a different decision if you felt like you're in a more negative state. Even the time of day might impact your patience. So when we're talking about behaviors and habits, they're largely influenced by our environment. And so the goal here, really thinking about it, is, well, how can we raise our self-awareness around how our environment impacts us? And so I'd like to cover the 5 kind of cues within the environment, or 5 triggers, as we talk about, that actually have an impact on your behaviors. So when we talk about an environment, or when you're talking about the habit development loop, we're looking at these 5 specific things. We're talking about location, time of day, after an event, social influence, or emotional state. Now let's take a look at maybe a few different examples of how these might show up. So if we're looking at an environment, maybe an example of an environment could be, or location could be at work, or maybe at your desk, working remotely. Time of day could be 9 a.m. After an event is maybe after eating dinner. Maybe your social influence would be with athletic friends, for example, or your emotional state is stressed out. Now, how might these examples actually influence your behaviors? So if we look at location, let's say you're at work, probably dress appropriately. If we're looking at time of day, say 9 a.m., maybe it's drinking a coffee or a tea. After dinner, maybe it's rinsing the dishes in the sink. Or with your athletic friends, you'll actually eat healthier foods. And if you're stressed out, you might actually eat more comfort foods. And so I'm curious, and I'd like you to input in the chat box. If you're looking at these 5 environments, or 5 cues within the environment, which of these do you feel might have the greatest impact in the workplace, or on your focus, or how you work? So we're looking at the left-hand side, those 5 cues, 5 things in your environment. Well, which of these do you feel has the greatest influence on the way that you work or your business habits? And just type it in the chat. Jason says time of day. Angela says emotional state affects everything for me. Yeah. Franco says location, time of day, emotional state. Okay. Location and emotional state. Yeah, so we seem to be all on the same page here. So if we're looking at the location, how well or what impact does it have on your focus if, let's say, you're working from bed versus actually maybe standing at a desk or sitting at the office? You know, when we're talking about time of day, we talked about this last week in terms of the impacts or the fluctuations in your energy levels. So how does time of day impact your focus or your energy? And then how does that then result in what you're working on? And lastly is emotional state. So how does your emotional state impact your productivity? How does it impact your relationships or how you work or collaborate with others? So we're talking about an environment. These tend to be the three things that we focus on or that come up when looking at, you know, how does this impact our workplace environment or how does this impact our focus? So I think the purpose here is really keeping these three things in mind. And if you're losing focus or if you're finding yourself maybe working less productively, it's taking a step back and saying, well, where am I working at the moment? What time of day is it? How do I actually feel? And now looking at those three things and finding maybe I can move locations and that might actually help boost my focus at the moment. Or you know what, maybe it's the afternoon and I'm feeling really tired, but I know by 4 o'clock, you know, I'll have a little bit more energy. So maybe I can focus more on menial tasks and schedule my more important tasks for later today. Or maybe it's your emotional state and maybe you're feeling drained and you might need to take a refreshing break to be able to come back and feel a little bit more focused. So again, it's raising the self-awareness around how your environment influences your productivity. So how can we design our environment for success? We've touched on the three main points here is location, time, emotional state. So Angela here mentioned in the chat that, you know, I always dress for work even though I'm at home. I think it makes a good point, right? Like how focused do you feel physiologically if you're in a bathrobe versus wearing a suit? If we maybe go on both sides of the spectrum. The idea here really is trying to think about, you know, how do these things kind of impact how we work? And I actually have a friend who's working at a local company here. And what he does is he actually has a badge for work. And even though he's working from home, he takes his badge and he puts his badge on while he's in work mode, and then he'll take his badge off at the end of the day. And just that small action actually signifies the start and end of his day. And it has an influence on how he works and how his focus is impacted. So for most of us, we may have, you know, we've been either working in the office or working at home, but whatever that might look like, designing our environment is more important now than ever. And so some of the ways you might be able to do that is to really devote specific places for new habits. And this will actually help make them stick, especially the business habits that we're talking about today. So the more environmental cues that you have or in your environment, the stronger the association becomes with them. And so if I can give a really clear example to this, a couple of years ago, I started taking up meditating and I hadn't made it into a habit yet. And so what I started doing was I looked at things within my environment that would help me make this into a habit. And so what I do, and I still do today, is I meditate in the same chair, so that's location, at the same time of day, and it's after I shower. So I have the location, I have time of day, and I have after an event. So by combining multiple environmental cues actually helps make my meditation practice habitual. Now, when you're talking about maybe a little bit more work-related, maybe it's designating specific places for different types of work. And maybe maybe you sit down, maybe you work from the kitchen table at the moment. And the idea is maybe not to sit in the same seat that you actually eat in, but rather sit in another seat at the kitchen table for when you work. And therefore making the association that, you know what, this is the chair I sit in to eat, And this is actually the chair I sit in to work. And it might sound silly, but even just small changes in your environment like that can actually trigger cues within your mind as to, okay, I'm ready to eat, or I'm ready to get to work. Another example of this is maybe focusing on your energy levels. So working on specific tasks at specific times during the day. The last piece here is maybe checking in on your emotional state, realizing whether you're stressed or you're feeling overwhelmed, and maybe taking on less duties if you're feeling stressed, or if you are feeling motivated, look at what's the hardest, the highest payoff task I have on my list today, and how can I tackle that first? So based on what we've discussed here, and I know Angela's already shared one of the things that she does, but I'd like to hear from you, and maybe Angela, if you have something else to add to this, how can you design your environment for success? What's one small thing you might be able to do, whether it be working from home or at the office, whether it be a specific time of day, location, or emotional state, that might have an impact on your productivity? And I'd like to just add it into the chat here as to how you might be able to design your environment for success. Now let's hear what some people have to say. Okay, so Daniel says, putting a divider between my bed and work area. So it's really distinguishing as to, my bed's for sleeping and I have a designated area here for my work, and making that distinction between the two. So using the location within your environment. Okay. Anybody else have any other examples or things that maybe they've implemented already, or they might be able to change within their environment? Okay, so Katie said, I move my desk outside of my room to have a designated work area. So moving the desk outside of her room help associate two different rooms with maybe two different types of activities. And you don't have to necessarily have an entire room dedicated to your office. I know for my wife, we have an office desk just set up just outside of the kitchen table, right next to it. Rather than working at the kitchen table where, that's associated with eating and sitting around the table, she actually has a designated area or designated seat that is her working seat. Oh, Darren, I love this one. So at the office, I'd say it for at home as well, making a habit of eating in the lunchroom instead of at my desk. Now, for those of you who might find yourself eating at your desk, I'd encourage you to think about how much are you really accomplishing while you're trying to wolf down your food and trying to hash out emails or work on a PowerPoint presentation, all while trying to multitask at one time. What is the actual impact on your energy levels, your focus for later in the day? Why not use eating or having lunch as an opportunity to take a break, to disconnect? And so that means actually maybe leaving your phone at your desk and rather stepping away to have that refreshing time on your own. We touched on this last week, where an optimal break requires you to be disconnected, and taking that time to come back to what you're working on and be able to work on it that much more effectively. Okay, well, I really appreciate everybody for sharing a little bit from their experience. The next piece I'd like to talk about a little bit further is I'm actually going to tell you a little bit of a story from one of the clients that I worked with. And so his name was Andy, and we were working last month together. And so he's in a management position and he has a team to lead and mentor, but he also has his own longer term mandates to deliver. And in discussing it with him, what we found out was he was struggling to move ahead on some of the big ideas and the bigger projects that were really important to the company that he was working with. And what happened was he ended up spending most of his time working with his team, and the rest of his energy was depleted when it came, was depleted by other urgent requests that came up. So does this sound familiar at all? Where you're spending more time putting out fires than actually progressing on your long-term objectives? So when working together, what we decided to do was to book time in his calendar. And I think we touched on this in the time management workshop. But by booking time in his calendar, what we did was he booked out an hour and a half on Tuesday and Thursday morning from 8:30 to 10. And not only that is he actually had a specific area on his desk where he would actually turn his chair a little bit and be facing just a slightly different direction for this hour and a half. And so what we did was we included here a specific location, we had a specific time and 2 specific days at which he was going to be working on. So we were incorporating multiple environmental cues to help him focus. And what we did with that time is we treated those hour and a half time blocks as if they were meetings with clients. As if it was a meeting with a client, so nobody else on his team could book that time. And that time was solely dedicated not to answering emails, but rather to safeguard his focus and to work exclusively on his highest value tasks. So Andy came back to me and told me how he had completed more on his long-term objectives in the last month than he had in the past few months prior, just by blocking off these 2 weekly time slots. So let's take a look at how you might be able to block off your time to be able to develop greater focus. So we've touched on this. It's the idea behind setting weekly meetings with yourself to really focus on deep work. So keeping in mind how you might be able to design your environment for success is looking at ways to be as much as possible free from distraction. So being really proactive about those focus habits, or how you might be able to proactively eliminate distractions that might come up. Now, other ways that you might be able to do that other than just being proactive is scheduling it into your calendar, making it a meeting within yourself. And then lastly is really cultivating your focus. And it's identifying, what am I looking to accomplish today? Or not even today, what am I looking to accomplish within this hour and a half time slot? And the idea is to identify that before the time slot actually comes up. And the reason for that being is, how often do you start your day and you identify, okay, well, what do I want to work on today? I have this to-do list, I have all these things going on. How do I want to spend my time? And then you actually waste a lot of time trying to figure out how you want to spend your day. So the goal here is to identify how you're going to spend this 90-minute business focus period before you even get started. So it's identifying it earlier in the week. What am I looking to accomplish in these 90 minutes? What are the tools or things that I might need? This is coming back to the 5-tab rule we discussed. So eliminating everything else in your desktop or in your browsers and only opening up the tools that you actually need to accomplish the one task at hand. And if you catch yourself being distracted, it's looking to minimize those external those distractions that are outside your control, or enjoy them in the moment and bring your attention back as quickly as possible. So the purpose really is creating clarity on what matters. And by providing clarity on what matters, it actually makes it really clear on what doesn't matter as well. And it'll help you easily determine where to apply your focus. I'll just pause for a moment here just to see if anybody has any questions based on maybe scheduling a business focus period. And then I'd actually like to touch on a technique in which you might be able to schedule your working periods throughout the day. Okay. So Angela mentioned here, before we move on to the next section, that it helps if those around you understand what you're doing and why, so they respect your time. And so I think that's really, it sounds like it's very interesting you mentioned that, Angela. And if I can read into that a little bit further, it's really setting expectations, whether it be setting expectations with other people in your household, whether it's setting expectations with the colleagues you have within the office. And the goal isn't to say I'm unavailable at all times, never bother me, where that would be very challenging, I can assume, to actually implement, but rather just asking for maybe some focused time on your own. And whether that's closing the office door or booking off your calendar just letting people know as to how you're using this time and why it's important to you. And by helping them understand why it's important to you, it's much more likely or easier for them to be able to respect that time. Okay, thank you for sharing. So the next thing I wanted to discuss here is called the Pomodoro Technique. It's also known as the tomato timer. And the idea behind this is that because our attention is limited, because our energy is limited, and well, so is our time, it's how can we maybe create a technique that aligns these three things together to be able to work more effectively. And I found the Pomodoro Technique to be very helpful in that regard. And so what is the Pomodoro Technique? So if you're looking at it here, first step is to identify what is the task that I'm looking to accomplish. And then once you've identified, okay, this is the one thing I want to be working on, it's setting a timer for about 25 minutes. And then working on that one task for that 25-minute period up until the timer rings. Then after that 25 minutes, then it's taking maybe a 2 to 5 minute break and then starting with another Pomodoro, another 25-minute sprint. And the idea here is because our attention and energy is limited, rather than trying to stretch ourselves thin by doing working marathons, working 3, 4, 5 hours straight without a break, is actually working in shorter sprints. And there are actually a lot of benefits to working in shorter sprints over a longer period of time. So first, what you'll notice is that you'll always have the goal in mind. You'll always have the end in mind because you're working in these shorter time periods, which forces you to identify, okay, what am I looking to accomplish in the next 25 minutes? Not what am I looking to accomplish by the end of the week or by the end of the day. So by creating these shorter time spans, it forces you to really get clear on what you're looking to do. And then from there, it also helps you to identify, okay, well, how much time do I have to spend on this? And maybe it's asking yourself, how many Pomodoros is it going to take for me to actually complete this? So for example, let's say putting together a PowerPoint presentation. You might know that, it's going to take me about an hour. So then the goal here would be, okay, I want to try and finish this PowerPoint presentation in 2 Pomodoros. And you can either download an app, or you can actually just set up a timer on your phone or your screen time or computer. And just to really sprint and work during those 25 minutes and trying to accomplish it within that given time. Now, in addition to this, if you're looking at routine tasks, let's say there's some routine tasks that we identified in the time management workshop that you do on a regular basis. I'd encourage you to record how many 25-minute sprints or Pomodoros does it take you to complete those routine tasks. And now you can almost set it up with a game with yourself, where, hey, last week it took me 4. I'm going to try to make it take 3 this time instead. And rather than it's not necessarily looking at working faster, but it's looking at working more effectively with how you use your time. And you can almost use this as a way of tracking how well you work and also at what times of day that you might work best. So before moving on, and I don't think I made it clear, so the last part here, it says take a 15 or 30-minute break. So the idea stands that when you're working in sprints, it's actually much more depleting towards your energy or your focus, even though it's taking less time. So after working for maybe 3 or 4 Pomodoro sprints, it's taking a bit of a longer break, whether that be 15 or 30 minutes, to be able to come back feeling more refreshed again. So I do want to pause here before moving on to creating our commitment plan together and just check in if anybody has any questions about how you might be able to use the Pomodoro technique. And I'm curious, does anybody currently utilize this or has maybe heard of it in the past? So Zia says that 25 minutes seems very short. So it seems like this is maybe something nobody's heard of before. So in terms of the 25 minutes, the goal with 25 minutes is that you'll actually notice by clearing out all other distractions But the 25 minutes can actually be quite depleting of your energy and your focus. And so what they say is once you start getting into the habit or getting used to this technique, it's after that 25-minute period, as long as you just focus on that one specific task and you've eliminated all other distractions, once the 25-minute timer is up, you have the option to check in with yourself and say, okay, do I want to take a 2 or 3 minute break right now? Or do I want to maybe work for another 25 minutes? Now, I'd only encourage you to do that once you've actually practiced with this technique a little bit. And so then the goal is that over time, maybe 25 minutes is short for you. And maybe now it's pushing it to 30 or 35 minutes. But the real purpose behind the Pomodoro technique is that too often we work for hours on end without taking a step away. And as we touched on last week, we know the impacts on our energy levels in working this way. And so by incorporating the Pomodoro technique, it helps force you to take even micro breaks. And those micro breaks have real positive impact on your energy and focus, while also utilizing your time as effectively as possible. So Dizzy, I hope that answered your question in terms of how you might be able to use them. So I know Branko mentioned or is asking about specific apps. It really depends if you're on Android or iOS device. I don't have any specific apps that to be able to use this with. I would recommend probably just Googling it would probably be your best bet. And I do apologize, I don't have anything at my fingertips at the moment. And oh, Jade is rating here the app called Be Focused. And thank you, yes, that is the one that I've used in the past, which is compatible with Apple. I don't know about Windows, but thank you for sharing that, Jada. All right. Any other questions about the Pomodoro technique? And maybe we can touch on it towards the end as we create our commitment plans. Okay. So in wrapping up this section, we've touched on the Pomodoro technique and how you might be able to use the time you have as effectively as possible. We've discussed how you can schedule in business focus periods into your weekly calendar, and also looked at the impact of your environment and how your environment influences your behaviors and your actions. So let's move on to the next section here. We're going to look at creating business habits. And so for those of you that might have been with us over the past 2 weeks, this will be a bit of a refresher for you as well. So I just wanted to share again, when we're talking about business habits, we're really looking at building a foundation that will help us thrive in the workplace. And what's interesting is a lot of these business habits actually have a ripple effect into the way that into other areas of our lives and the way that we do things. And so here are some of the business habits that we discussed today. And what I encourage you to do is from this list, or maybe from your notes that you might have taken, I'd like you to share in the chat, what is one business habit or one thing that's coming to mind for you that we learned today that you think would have the biggest impact on the way that you work? So I'd like you to choose one and to share it if you feel comfortable with everybody in the chat here. And just while you're thinking about that, a few of the things that came up is, Pomodoro technique, the business focus periods, impacts when we're looking at designing your environment, whether it be location, time of day, emotional state, how you might be able to optimize your attention space, what are the costs of multitasking, and lastly, the productivity paradigm and aligning your time, energy, and attention to be able to work productively. So Andrea here says business focus period is one of the things that are standing out for her. Anybody else have anything that's coming up for them? So Nada agrees the business focus period, as well as implementing the Pomodoro technique. Nalita says optimizing your attention space and being aware of the costs of multitasking. So Daniel says all of it, and I love that. I appreciate that you think it's all valuable. I'd positively challenge you to actually think about just what is one thing you feel would have the biggest impact. And the idea is not trying to take everything on all at once, but rather think about, you know what, let me just practice this one thing and then build upon that. Darren says the cost of multitasking. All right, Disease says the Pomodoro Technique and the business focus periods are two things that are really worth trying for me. And so an idea there is maybe being able to combine the two is within your business focus periods, utilizing the Pomodoro Technique to take advantage of the time you've set aside for yourself. So when we're thinking about behavior change, and we've really talked about this today around these triggers or these environmental influences, we've talked about time of day, location, after an event, social influence, even emotional state. And so when we're looking at our current behaviors, it's figuring out, okay, well, what is the trigger or the cue that's kind of sparking this current behavior? And if I'm looking to take on a new business habit, how might I be able to replace what I'm currently doing? And so what we've come up with is kind of this, this statement where it's when I'm triggered or when X happens, instead of Y, or instead of enacting on my current behavior, I will Z. So I will start this new business habit. And so what we're going to do here is we'll go through a few commitments together, a few examples, and I would like you to create your own commitment around what is the trigger when X happens, what is the current behavior you're doing, and then what is the new business habit or new thing you're going to look at incorporating. And so let's take a look at a few of those example commitments first. So the first example, when I find myself multitasking, instead of jumping between items, I will focus my attention on one task. So when I find myself multitasking, instead of jumping between items, I will focus my attention on one task. That's one example. Take a look at the second example. When I need to focus, instead of working from anywhere, I will arrange my environment for success. So it actually, even just in reading this, I would like this to be a little bit more clear. And maybe it is, I will identify a specific location to work from, and whatever that location might be for you. So I know for myself how I would maybe implement this is when I need to focus, instead of working from anywhere, whether it be the kitchen table, the kitchen bar, sitting on another chair, not even sitting at my desk, but I would say I will stand at my desk. And what I've noticed is that by standing at my desk and working, I actually feel more focused. That's part of the reason why I offer these presentations or do these workshops while I'm standing. And so that's how I might refine this commitment. Let's take a look at number 3 here. So when I need to work on important tasks, instead of prioritizing what's urgent, I will schedule a business-focused period. So now here what we're doing is, instead of just letting the day go by and whatever is urgent kind of dictate how we spend our time, energy, and focus, it's scheduling time in our calendar to be able to work on those important tasks. So I'm going to turn this over to you now, and I'd like to hear from you. And I'd like you to create your own statement here, whereas when I get triggered, instead of the current behavior you're enacting, I will do this new behavior. So I'd like you to take a moment and write this out. And I'm going to pull up. So if anybody wants to unmute themselves once they have their statement done, I'd like to hear from at least 2 or 3 people that might be interested in sharing their commitment, and we can kind of discuss it, how they might be able to implement it. So Branko's written in the chat. So when I get distracted by other people's priorities, instead of jumping on it, so I'm really interested in this one, Branko, because I think this is something that, you know, impacts a lot of us, where other people all of a sudden put their priorities on us. And almost out of habit, we say, yes, no problem, and we jump right in, without really thinking about the long-term impact on how and what it might have to us. So I'd encourage you, and I don't know if there's something after that, but so what Branko's written in the chat here is, when I get distracted by others' priorities or by other people's priorities, instead of jumping on it, I will prioritize. And so I'd encourage you maybe go even a step further and say, you know, I'll prioritize, or I'll review my priorities and then prioritize. And you're getting very clear on the new behavior you're looking to act, where I will prioritize might not, you know, it might be clear for you, but for others might not be as clear. And I see you've gone off mute here. So if you'd like to chime in, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I turned my mic on because I think it might be easier to explain it than to type it out. It's very easy to focus on, like I said, somebody else's priority because there's nothing wrong with other people having priorities. But if you don't pay attention to it before too long, it just becomes all your work is to focus on other people's priorities. So what I mean by I will, instead of jumping on it, I will prioritize. I will prioritize as to where it falls in that, call it the importance level or list, or what you mentioned, I believe in the first session, if the tasks are, let's say, urgent and important, maybe instead of you, Scott, coming to me and saying, can you do this? If they are important and urgent to you, maybe the priority should be that you look after that task. That would be one example. I don't mind the idea of helping out, but it could easily become you're too busy to do it, therefore you try to put it off on me, kind of thing.
Okay. And so it seems, Branko, by what you've mentioned is avoiding taking on other people's priorities at the cost of your own priorities, and being really intentional as to what is on your plate, and then reevaluating, you know, wanting to help others, which a lot of us come from that place of wanting to help our colleagues, wanting to help others. But at times it comes at the cost of our own priorities. So being really clear around that.
Yeah, I think that would be, that's a good way to put it. If it comes at the cost of your own priorities, then it has to slip down that priority list.
Yeah. And I know we're all off our videos at the moment, but I can guarantee there are other people nodding along with you here. They're in the same boat. And so I'm curious if we got a little bit more clear on I will prioritize. If we think about a small step or a small easy action to take. Let's say I'm coming in and I'm putting a priority on your plate at the moment. How might you handle that?
Well, I would have to evaluate your priority, and if it's, I mean, of course you got to evaluate the consequences. For example, in my line of work, we work in construction. Sometimes, let's say, people will forget to do something. No problem. When it becomes obvious that, oh, I forgot to do this, we need to get on it. It's okay to jump on it and help you, let's say, with that. But if that becomes your habit, that every time you need something done, it's always at the last minute. Now it becomes more of a, I guess, reflection on, I'm going to use you, Scott, because I can see you on the screen. It becomes more of a reflection on you, that everything you do is, you know, last minute. So then it becomes difficult to prioritize, to take you seriously. Let's put it that way. Like if you know, if this is always happening. So I mean it in that way. Like, I mean, sometimes the customer calls and they say, hey, I need this done right now. And one of our project managers comes to me and says, we need this done right now. Maybe it becomes a priority number 1.
Yeah.
Maybe it becomes a priority number 10.
Okay.
Right? It will depend on that, right?
All right.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing, Branko. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Does anybody else have any examples or would be willing to share their commitment and kind of discuss it? I really appreciated what Branko had mentioned here, because I do think that, you know, it applies to a lot of us. And that's why I encourage everyone to maybe share their commitment, because most of the time, if you're committing to this, it would have a positive impact on other people as well. We're on day 3 of the 3-part series. I figured by this point we'd gotten to know each other well enough to feel comfortable sharing. Well, if that's the case, what I'll do is we'll continue towards the end, and I'll stick around for a couple more minutes. If anybody would like to maybe input in the chat or come off mute and share, you're more than welcome to. And so I guess what comes up once you've actually created your commitment is identifying, you know, what would make this impossibly easy, and looking at ways about, well, what about this is important to you? What might get in the way of taking action? And then what's a small commitment you're willing to make to step forward? So again, I'll repeat it. Why is this important? What might get in the way? And what's a small commitment you're willing to make? So if we talk about the example Branko had mentioned, it's important to him because if he doesn't prioritize, you know, his own priorities, he'll spend all of his time, all of his energy on the priorities of others. What might get in the way of taking action is maybe falling back on that old habit of jumping in right away. And so a small commitment for his example here might just be evaluating the priority when it comes on his plate, and then being able to determine, where does this fit into my list or my list of priorities? So coming to an end, I really appreciate everyone that's joined us, whether this is your first session or you've joined us for the entire 3-part series. I'm really thankful for everyone coming in. And I'd really appreciate if you'll take a few moments just to fill out a feedback survey. I've just shared it in the chat here. There's only about 4 or 5 questions. It won't take you very long to fill out, but it provides myself as a facilitator a little bit of a better idea on, you know, what you got out of the presentation, and also helps support Technation as to understanding, you know, what their community is looking for in terms of trainings. So if you enjoyed not just this workshop, but part of this 3-part series, I'd really like you to thank Tim and the rest of the team at Technation for bringing me on. If you'd like to learn more or catch up on some other videos or things along those lines, I encourage you to reach out to me on LinkedIn. But otherwise, I'll stick around for a few minutes. And Tim will be sharing the recording, I believe, with everybody.